Here's a question most people never ask about the Manson murders. Why was Charles Manson free in 1969, when by all rights he should have been in prison? He had violated parole multiple times. Police had investigated him multiple times. Authorities knew about the group living around him, and yet somehow nothing stopped him. Until the night the Tate LaBlanca murders shocked the world. For decades the case seemed solved, but one book argues the real story may be far more stranger than anyone realised. And it all starts with Chapter 1 of Chaos: Charles Manson, the CIA, and the secret history of the 1960s. Hello, I'm Kishi, and welcome to the channel. Today we're diving into the fascinating book Chaos: The Truth Behind the Manson Murders. It's a book that raises some surprising questions about one of the most infamous stories in modern history. Let's explore together. Let's go deeper into Chapter 1. Let me tell you something strange about one of the most famous murder cases in history. Most people think the story is simple. A cult leader named Charles Manson, a group of devoted followers called the Manson family, and a night in 1969 when unimaginable violence shocked America during the Tate LaBlanca murders. The case seemed solved. The motive seemed clear. The explanation neat and terrifying. But the deeper you look at this story, the stranger it becomes. And that's exactly what happened to the man who wrote this book. So here's how it started. Journalist Tom O'Neill was given what sounded like a pretty normal assignment. Write a magazine article about the Manson murders. That's it. Just a retrospective look back at the case. Explain what happened. Talk about its impact on the 1960s. The kind of story a journalist might finish in a few months. 3 months. That's how long the editor thought it would take. But almost immediately, something felt off. For decades, the official explanation of the murders came from one man, the prosecutor who put Manson behind bars, Vincent Bugliosi. Bugliosi later wrote a massive bestseller called Helter Skelter, and that book became the definitive version of the story, according to Bugliosi. Manson had convinced his followers that a race war was coming. He believed the Beatles were sending him secret messages through their music, especially the song Helter Skelter from the Beatles. Bugliosi said Manson believed the murders would ignite that war. It was bizarre, but it made sense to the madness. And the jury believed it. The public believed it. Hollywood repeated it. For decades, the Helter Skelter theory became history. Case closed. Or so it seemed. When Tom O'Neill started fact-checking the details, he noticed something strange. Not a huge discovery, just a tiny crack. A date that didn't match. A timeline that didn't make sense. At first, he thought it was nothing. But then he found another inconsistency. And another. And another. Soon, he realized something disturbing. Some of the things written in Helter Skelter didn't match the actual records. Witness accounts were different. Events happened in a different order. Details had changed. And that raised a dangerous question. If the official story had small errors, how many more were hiding underneath? Then O'Neill began looking deeper into Charles Manson himself. And that's where things started getting really strange. Because Manson wasn't supposed to be free in 1969. In fact, he should have been in prison. For most of his life, Manson had been exactly where you'd expect him to be, behind bars. He had been arrested again and again. Car theft, fraud, pimping, parole violations. He had spent most of his youth moving between reform schools and prisons. And in 1967, when he was finally released from federal prison, he was still under strict supervision. One mistake, and he should have gone straight back. But something odd happened. He made a lot of mistakes, and nothing happened. Manson repeatedly violated his parole. He was arrested, questioned, reported, but somehow, every time it seemed like he might go back to prison, the consequences just disappeared. Think about that for a second. A man with a long criminal history, running a strange group of young followers, living communally, moving across California, involved with drugs. And the authorities kept letting him walk free. Even people inside law enforcement later admitted something wasn't right. Some officers were baffled. They had reports on Manson. They knew his group was causing trouble. Yet, investigations kept stalling. Cases were dropped. Arrests led nowhere. It was as if the system kept looking the other way. By the late 1960s, Manson had gathered a group of mostly young people around him. Runaways, drifters, lost souls looking for meaning. They lived together in desert communes and abandoned ranches, most famously at the Erie Spawn Ranch. And everyone who met Manson described the same thing. He had an uncanny ability to control people. He could talk for hours, slowly breaking people down, convincing them that the world was an illusion, that their identities didn't matter, that only he understood reality. People who had known him for a few days suddenly treated him like a prophet. Some gave up their families. Some gave up their names. Some were willing to kill for him. And that left O'Neill wondering something very unsettling. Where did Manson learn how to do that? Because here's the strange thing. Manson wasn't educated. He barely finished school. He had spent most of his life in prison. Yet somehow, he had an advanced understanding of psychological manipulation. The kind of techniques that could completely reshape a person's identity, break down their sense of reality, turn them into devoted followers. And in the 1960s, there were actually scientists studying exactly that. Researchers experimenting with mind control, psychological conditioning, the limits of human influence. And that part of the story barely appears in the official narrative. As O'Neill continued digging, the article he was writing started growing out of control. Every new interview revealed another inconsistency, another unexplained decision, another strange coincidence. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. And he still couldn't explain something that should have been simple. How did a small cult led by a career criminal manage to slip through the cracks of the justice system? Until it was too late. At some point during this research, O'Neill realised something. He wasn't just writing an article anymore. He had stumbled into a mystery. Because the more he learned about the Manson case, the more it felt like the surface story had been carefully constructed. Almost like the public had been given an explanation that was dramatic, but convenient. A story about a madman, a cult, a race war prophecy. Simple, terrifying, and easy to understand. But underneath that explanation, there were holes, large ones. And those holes led to questions no one had fully answered. By the end of chapter 1, O'Neill realises something chilling. If the official story was completely accurate, there shouldn't be this many contradictions. There shouldn't be this many unexplained decisions. There shouldn't be this many missing pieces. And that realisation leads to a question that drives the entire book. What if the story we think we know about Charles Manson is only part of the truth? What if the real story is bigger, stranger, and far more unsettling than anyone ever imagined. Because once Tom O'Neill started pulling at the threads of the Manson case, the entire narrative began to unravel. And the deeper he went, the closer he came to secrets buried deep in the history of the 1960s. Secrets that some people may have preferred to stay hidden. So here's the question that Chapter 1 leaves us with. If Charles Manson was just a manipulative cult leader, why did the system repeatedly fail to stop him? Why were his crimes overlooked? Why were investigations dropped? And why does the official story still contain so many contradictions? Because if those questions have real answers, they might change the way we understand one of the most infamous crimes in American history. And this is only the beginning. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed exploring this book with me. If you did, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves uncovering the deeper stories behind books. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.